Welcome to Glioblastoma AKA GBM, a podcast brought to you by the Glioblastoma Research Organization, highlighting stories of GBM warriors, caregivers, medical advisors, and more. Welcome to Season 3 of our podcast, where we delve deep into the world of glioblastoma, also known as GBM. Join us as we navigate the complexities of glioblastoma with expert insights and heartfelt narratives. Please remember that the information presented in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended to treat, diagnose, or prevent any disease, and you should contact your medical provider or healthcare team with any questions. Plus Therapeutics is developing a novel treatment for recurrent glioblastoma patients. Their targeted radiotherapeutic has the potential to deliver a single yet highly powerful radiation dose directly to a tumor without damaging healthy tissue or causing significant side effects. They are currently enrolling patients for their NIH-supported RESPECT GBM clinical trial. For more information on this recurrent glioblastoma trial, please visit respect-trials.com/GBM. Rod Nordland, welcome to the Glioblastoma AKA GBM Podcast. I am so excited to have you on the show today to talk about your experience as a writer, a traveler, and also someone that is currently living with glioblastoma, and to discuss the importance of disability awareness when it comes to glioblastoma, as well as your book that was just released and your new book that's coming out. So welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here with me today. To get started, I would love to hear more about your background. I know you were a writer for the New York Times. You've been to over 150 countries. So my first question is, what is your favorite place that you've traveled to and why?
I used to say Cambodia because I've made a lot of trips there. It's a tormented country. And I went there on the back of the Cambodian genocide. And it was deeply moving. The people were, despite the genocide, they were the nicest people I'd ever met anywhere. And that was intensely moving. But, Cambodia is not that accessible, especially for somebody who's disabled. But a place that is accessible, I think, and is my one all-time favorite place in the world, is the island of Capri. Capri is the proper pronunciation in Italian. It's an island off the coast of Naples, about a mile long, half a mile wide. There is no motor traffic. There's one highway that connects the two sides of the island. One side is called Capri. The other side is called Anna Capri. Both sides are just the most beautiful places in the world. The sun and sea views are just fantastic. And because the island gets a lot of sun, the gardens are incredibly profuse and beautiful. And so everywhere you're surrounded by flowers and lemon trees, and really astonishing views.
Yeah, I remember it was over COVID. I got into listening to Italian music randomly. It just happened out of nowhere. And it's like 4 years later, I was able to pick up pretty decent conversational. I would say I'm fluent. An Italian would probably not say that I'm fluent. And it's such a beautiful country and language, and I think it's so fascinating. So that's cool to hear you say that answer. What was the beginning of your journey with glioblastoma like? I would love to hear you talk more about, I guess, like the initial stage of what happened and how you knew that you had glioblastoma and what that process looked like for you.
The New York Times had asked me to go to India for a month to take over our bureau in India because the bureau chief was going on vacation. So I had to be there for a month. And I thought, well, if I'm going to be here for a month, it'd be nice. I know India pretty well. So I invited my partner, Leila, to come and join me. We traveled around the country a bit, and I took her to some of my favorite places. She went back to England. She had to go back to work. I stayed on. The next day, I was jogging in these gardens called the Lodi Gardens. Leila was back in England, And while I was jogging, I had a seizure. I think a grand mal seizure. Fell in the street, and a good Samaritan came along and rescued me, got me into an ambulance and to a hospital. So that Indian hospital, it was a poor local hospital. It wasn't one of their premier private hospitals, but they did a brain scan, and the brain scan showed an octopus-shaped mass in my brain. And that's a characteristic of a glioblastoma tumor, the shape alone. So they sent the scans to my doctors in New York, and they were pretty sure it was a glio. Well, I was lucky because my partner, Leila, had a visa to India. She was the only person able to reach me, right away. She jumped on the first flight from London, and she was there the next morning, the morning of day 2. And I was in a hospital, and she got there in time to help the nurses restrain me because I was trying to get out of the bed forcibly and fighting them. So she came and she got there in time to help restrain me. She talked to the doctors, and they told her that I had what they called a space-occupying mass or lesion in my brain.
Do you remember the first thing that you and Leila said to each other when she walked in the hospital in India?
Yes, I do. Very clearly. I said, "You came back. That's wonderful. I hope you took whatever airlines it was that got there. I think British. I hope you took British. You're going to be rolling in air miles." I've always been kind of obsessed about collecting air miles.
Really?
And, yeah.
Well, you've traveled a lot. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And my kids all traveled wherever they wanted to go.
So Rod Nordland, airline mile aficionado.
Yeah, but I haven't been traveling lately. Mm-hmm. So I've been using those miles up much more than accumulating them. But anyway, Leila got there just in time. I mean, the lesson is you always need to have a family member as an advocate when you're struck by a disease like this. And she was there to argue with the doctors to find out what they knew. They told her I had a brain tumor, but they didn't tell her. Oh, they didn't tell me. They wanted her to tell me, which was horrible.
Why do you think that was?
That was just kind of Indian hospital policy.
Okay.
I think they just felt it was better for a family member to tell you than for the doctor.
So what did the process look like from after that? Did you have surgery there? Or did you get to New York? Did you go to London? What was the next step for you?
We discussed it a lot. Leila was able to be my intermediary with my employer, who was willing to fly me wherever necessary for treatment. They were great then and throughout my whole illness. It's not as if I was wounded on the job, something of that sort. I just got an illness. I could have gotten anywhere doing anything. And they could have just said, "Oh, sorry about that, but nothing we can do." But they didn't. They really stepped in and did everything they could. And so Leila was there to talk to them and to talk with family members and others, discuss where I should go, whether back to England. At the time we were living together in London. Part of me really wanted to go back to our home. We'd only started living together very recently. Part of me wanted to go to America because I'm American, and I think the medical care system here is better than anywhere else in the world. Expensive, but good. So I wanted to go there. And in the end, my company arranged a medevac to take both Leila and I together, and it was the world's cushiest medevac. It was in business class of Cathay Pacific, which is a wonderful airline. The flight, unfortunately, ridiculously long because President Trump at the time was threatening to start war with Iran, and Iran is next to India, and so airlines wouldn't fly over Iran, and our flight, therefore, had to go the wrong way around the world.
And how many years ago was this?
This is in 2019.
Moving forward, I know that you've talked about your disability. In your initial stages of having glioblastoma, did that affect you? And then, I guess, or when did you start to have those effects where it kind of impacted your day-to-day life?
Well, initially, having a brain tumor was kind of fun. You know, I was laid up in an apartment in central New York, and people could visit me, and I could visit them. You know, this is not so bad. So I have a fatal brain tumor, but it doesn't hurt. I don't feel it. There are no obvious effects of it. I was undergoing the normal standard of care treatments, beginning with surgery to resect the tumor, then radiotherapy, followed by chemotherapy. But then, right around, the therapy was clearly impacting my immune system, my platelets, which are important in the immune response. My platelet levels had cratered to some number so low I couldn't have further chemo. The most stunning thing was the immediate effect on my short-term memory. When Leila got to India and was able to talk to me, the doctors had said they wanted her to break the news to me that I had a brain tumor. So she did. And she had to do it like 5 times. It was like Groundhog's Day. She would tell me, we would go through an emotional time together, absorbing the what that meant. And then half an hour later, I would say, what's wrong with me? Well, I'm in the hospital. And she would tell me again that I had a brain tumor. In the end, she had to tell me 5 times. And
wow.
Each time it was as if I was hearing it for the first time. It's really a nightmare, especially for her, I think.
You mentioned talking about how you were afraid that your disability would make things worse, and that in regards to like your job and everything you were doing, that you would be pushed out the door quicker. What was that like for you?
I didn't realize that at first. I didn't realize at first that glioblastoma is a disabling disease, both physically and mentally, and that I was going to become a disabled person.
Looking back to the initial part of when your left side began to lose function, like can you walk us through that? Or was that immediately like after your surgery?
That was right after the surgery. Well, the most immediate impact is I wanted to write a book, a memoir of my war experiences, and also a memoir of my experience with brain cancer. So writing the book, I could no longer type, which is a huge deficit. Astonishingly fast typist in normal times. So I went from being able to type 100 words a minute to being able to type possibly 5 with, touch typing with both hands. Mm-hmm. And I discovered, thanks to Leila, really, she's a writer too, and she's always written in longhand and is a big advocate of it. So I tried that with my right hand, which is fully functional. Discovered I was able to write actually quite fluently, quickly, with my right hand. The only problem is it had to be translated into something people could read, which is not the case with my handwriting.
It's like you've got doctor handwriting.
Yeah, worse than that.
You talked about re-identifying your identity after having a diagnosis. So what was that like for you?
That was difficult. I'm a stubborn person, and I think I just wasn't willing to accept that I was no longer the same person.
What was the internal dialogue that went along with that?
I'm sorry to interrupt. It's like,
no, you're good.
It's like sometimes what we sent you was that took place in the course of a conversation we had about it. And I just wanted to remind you, do you remember how like passionately you talked to me about what you
Leila, do you want to join?
Well, yeah, I was.
Come in. Do you want to take a seat?
I think, yeah. I'm going to have to go. I've got a call in 15, but I'd love to just.
Yeah. Join the party.
Hi. Yeah. So what I was trying to say was we talked about it. I think it's a really hard thing to talk about, to acknowledge, especially for a man in his position, is the change in how the world sees him. And one of the things you spoke to me when we were talking, just the two of us, was about this feeling of, being a new person who's disabled. Do you remember that we spoke about it?
Yeah.
And you said it was both mentally and physically or cognitively. I don't know if you can expand on that at all. It's a really hard thing to acknowledge, but we felt that this podcast was the kind of forum where that acceptance, to speak with that openness would be.
Looking back on it, I really wish that early on when I was diagnosed, instead of peppering me with a bunch of statistics that are decades out of date, in fact, all the longevity statistics for this disease are based on data from the 40s and 50s. And things have changed a lot then. The quality of care has changed. The standard of care hasn't changed in 50 years, 40 years, but the quality of care has changed. Nowadays there's better quality MRIs. There are better drugs to treat the symptoms, and there's much better quality radiotherapy. Temodar hasn't changed. That's still the standard of care.
But remember that you wanted to really speak about, I don't know if maybe you just don't feel like it, talking about some of the physical things that have happened and how it feels, which is, you said, your next book, which you started to write about disability. I don't know if you feel like it, but that was something you felt quite strongly about, passionately, I would even say.
Yeah, it took me a while to admit to myself that I was indeed a disabled person. And I was completely in denial.
I remember you talking a lot about this new sense of fragility that you'd never experienced as a strong, powerful, physical man. Used to be a boxer, didn't you, when you were young?
You were a boxer.
Yeah.
I love boxing.
Semi-pro boxer. After school job in a gym.
Well, you talk about how you woke up after surgery and your left side wasn't functioning, but you then said that you were fine the first couple of years of the disease. So when did the actual left side paralysis begin to affect you?
It was there right away after surgery.
Okay.
But it wasn't noticeable until I started doing things and discovered how many things there are in life that require two hands.
Right.
Just buttoning your shirt needs two hands, tying your shoelaces and so on. So a lot of those things I had to relearn to do, which I did with the help of a hand therapist at HSS, who is wonderful.
I know you talk about coming to terms with being a different person, but along this journey, where have you found hope?
In love. With Leila, with my children, who had been estranged from me before my illness, but the illness brought them back to me. And but above all with Leila, who's been with me really every step of the way since my first seizure in India. And that's just been amazing. And she's been incredible.
I know Leila's in a meeting right now, but when she watches this, is there something that you've never told her that you would like to tell her in regards to anything about your journey so far?
We talk all the time, so I'm not sure there isn't a subject we haven't covered. But, of course, I've told her that I love her. And
can you talk about your book, Waiting for the Monsoon? What sparked the name of it? And I know you just released it, so I'd love you to share with the listeners more about that.
Sure. The title comes from the headline of an article I wrote in for the New York Times.
In 2019.
The 19th of September, 2019. I wrote it from my hospital bed at Weill Cornell.
Wow.
And I was very proud of it. And asked them if they were interested in publishing it. And they did, and it got a huge response from the public and also attracted the interest of a publisher who asked me, well, they didn't ask me, I asked them, but they expressed interest, and I put up a book proposal and proposed that I write a memoir of my many years as a war correspondent, concluding with my experience fighting brain disease.
Is there a reason that you went into war correspondence, or was it something that you just ended up in, or did you always have a fascination for that?
I never had a fascination for it.
Okay.
And I still don't. Like a lot of things in life, I tripped into it.
How?
The Philadelphia Inquirer had posted me to Bangkok. And when they did, my beat was all of Asia. The biggest stories going were war stories. The end of the war in Cambodia, the invasion of Cambodia by the Vietnamese, and then following that, the massive exodus of what were called the boat people, who were Cambodian refugees. And then these huge refugee camps on the border that would have as much as 100,000 residents, and these little wars were underway there, where various rival factions were fighting like a bunch of hyenas for whatever they could steal from the camp and then resell, food supplies and medical supplies and so on. So that was my first introduction to it, but I handled it well, and I think that encouraged the Inquirer to send me to other conflicts. The next one I covered was East Timor, and then I had done that so much when my tour was over, and the executive editor asked me to come home. I said, no, I want to remain a foreign correspondent. Send me to Central America. There were a lot of wars going on then, in Nicaragua and El Salvador. So he did. He agreed to do that. And I did that and went there. I was there for a couple of years. It was a very dramatic period in the early 80s when the death squads were rampant. I guess I learned a lot there too. But having acquired this experience and knowledge, it made me qualified to be a war correspondent, and maybe more importantly, to run bureaus in war zones.
In your article, Waiting for the Monsoon, you talk about taking that time to learning to love your tumor. Looking back now that was about five years ago, Do you feel like you've learned to love your tumor? And like, what are your thoughts on that statement that you wrote?
Yeah, I do. My tumor has given me, it's been my gift. It's made me, stronger and more loving, more kinder, funnier, more forgiving. And, and it's brought my children back to me. That's been the most important effect. And many close friends who have remained there for me, but they've also often helped me when I needed help. There was one time when I was having seizures at home in New York, frequent seizures, and the doctors wanted me either to come into the hospital or to have somebody check on me once an hour to make sure I was still coherent and not suffering any kind of seizure or brain damage. So a friend of mine, a lovely guy, who had 2 children of his own at home, he nonetheless, he came over to check on me once every hour. When he had to finally go home, he continued to check on me by phone. He would call me up and make sure I still had my shit together, and then he had a number to call for my doctor if I didn't. It was incredibly decent of him. There was a period when I needed to have nighttime aids every night because of the fear of further seizures. As it turned out, that didn't happen, but many of my friends volunteered their time to come and sleep in my apartment. So there was somebody responsible and capable at hand who could call the doctors if necessary.
How are your friends during your glioblastoma journey? What was that like for you?
It was both incredibly heartening and incredibly saddening, depending on the friend. A lot of glioblastoma patients have this experience of being ghosted by their friends. Not necessarily ghosted, but their friends can no longer cope with seeing them in this reduced state, and it's easier for them to just not come or to disappear. That's really hard. But then there have been other friends who have gone to incredible extremes to help me, and that's been really heartening and rewarding.
I know you mentioned that you're writing a new book. Can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, I'm going to call it An Invisible Man, partly because The Invisible Man title has already been taken, of course, by Richard Baldwin in his beautiful book about being Black in America. So, An Invisible Man. And I feel like this disability I have is actually kind of made me invisible, to people.
Why?
They don't see me for what I am. They see me as a lame old man, and it's easier for them just to look away. And
what do you want them to see?
I want them to see a person who still has a lot to contribute to this world, even if that's not immediately apparent. Like a lot of disabled people, first of all, my disabilities are not visible. I mean, I walk with a cane, but I don't always need the cane. And people don't see the disabilities. It's not like I have a leg cut off or something that's obvious. And I do, when I go out, I just feel like I've become invisible to the world. And I think a lot of glioblastoma patients go through that feeling. I wish when I first got the disease that somebody had told me that this would happen, that I would become disabled physically and mentally and no longer be the person I had been.
How do you think knowing would have impacted where you are today?
Well, I was determined to prove that wrong. And this book that I've just written, I think, was the best way I could find to do that. And the response to the book has been incredibly gratifying.
For anyone that hasn't read the book, what is the main takeaway that you want them to, that if you're like telling someone, hey, read this book, what is the main thing that you want them to take away from reading Waiting for the Monsoon?
Well, at one point in the book, my editor at my publisher, HarperCollins, asks me, why don't you explain why you're writing this book? You know, there aren't many brain tumor patients who write books for obvious reasons. And so I said, okay, sure. You know, when I was a roving war correspondent, people would often say to me, somewhat to my embarrassment, you know, you lead such an adventurous life. And I had a stock response to that, which became my response to my editor. The only true adventures are adventures of the mind. And this book is my adventure of the mind. It's going to restore my sense of self-worth, my sense of my position in the world, my sense that I'm not completely disabled, but that I'm still able to produce something.
Do you feel like you've accomplished that goal? Do you feel happy with the book?
I'm very happy with the book, yeah.
That's incredible. And so talking about your new book, what is the goal of that one?
Well, I want to share with one of the most touching things since my book has come out has been responses I've gotten from social media and otherwise, from other glio patients and from other disabled people. And I thought there's a need to say something to all those people. Glioblastoma is just a horrendous disease. It's, some doctors call it the Terminator because it always comes back and it has a reboundingly aggressive nature. And, you know, it's also a life sentence. The rest of your life, you kind of live from brain scan to brain scan, hoping it hasn't spread. And even like me, I've been almost 4 years now without any major recurrence. The rest of my life, I'll be waiting for that next brain scan. And so that's my waiting for the monsoon. To go back to your original question, the title came from the headline of that article. I wrote the article, not the headline. And I think that kind of stuck and struck a chord with people.
And in your new book, can you talk more about what the plan is, what you want to share, and what the big takeaway will that be? I know that you had mentioned it's focused on disability, but what in particular?
Not just disability, the lack of knowledge and information about disability. Very few GBM patients know from the get-go that they have a disabling disease.
Do you think that if you were just starting your glioblastoma journey that you would want to know that would happen? Or would you prefer the ignorance of not knowing?
No, I've always wanted to know, not to be ignorant. You know, when I was in India, the doctors were insisting on telling me that I had in my brain a space-occupying lesion, and I didn't know what that was. It was a term with no meaning, and I challenged them and said, "This sounds like a brain tumor," and they said, "No, we can't call it a brain tumor unless we can resect it." And
the team at IMVAX is dedicated to delivering new, personalized immunotherapy approaches to improve outcomes for people living with glioblastoma and other solid tumors. IMVAX is currently recruiting for a randomized Phase 2b clinical trial of IGV-001 in newly diagnosed glioblastoma patients. Learn more about this Phase 2b trial at imvax.com or clinicaltrials.gov. IMVAX, advancing a new approach to personalized cancer immunotherapy.
Rod and I did a whole long mindfulness meditation program actually after he was diagnosed in the second year as part of coming to terms with, you know, how we're going to deal with this whole situation. It's so difficult. And as a couple, we're actually about to have couples therapy in half an hour. We have a woman who worked with us since the beginning of his illness because it's posed so many challenges, as I'm sure you've heard many people say, the challenges it poses in a relationship are just...
So what are some things that you guys talk about in couples therapy?
Well, one of the things that she's amazing. She's an experience working with incurable disease and also with brain injuries, which are so hard. She said to us at the beginning, because we were really like fighting, and we both, it's not only Rod who has got the change of identity, it's us as a couple who has a change in identity. And she said, you have to think about it that there are actually 3 people in the relationship. There's Leila, Rod, and now there's glioblastoma, and it's an extra person.
It's extra party
in the relationship. And so that's one thing. But the other thing we talk a lot about is how do we preserve our roles in relation to each other, so that because I have had to look after Rod in so many ways. I used to be extremely independent. Both of us were. And if anything, I would say he would look after me, you know, and it's incredibly hard to keep. It's so hard, isn't it? Because that changes. He feels different, and I can see how he feels like he doesn't want me to look after him. He's a man, like the powerful.
He was telling me how stubborn he is.
He is. Oh my God, he's so stubborn. And I'm not saying I don't want to look after him. I've changed. Like, that's not even an issue. Like, it's almost like I can handle anything, but I don't want to change how I love him. Does that make sense? I want to still love him for his strength. I want to still love him for his manliness.
What are things that you guys do that you've like learned in therapy to kind of stay on that trajectory?
Seeing this therapist for so long that we can channel her.
We channel her whenever we have
problems.
And
when she's not available, we have a session in which we take turns posing as Megs, because we know her so well.
He channels. It was all his idea. So basically, he pretends to be Megs, and he asks me. He says, "So, how are you two feeling today?" And then I have to answer as if Megs is with us. And it's amazing. It really works. We both pull ourselves together, because often it just comes down to like, we're so stressed. You know, you start squabbling over ridiculous things, and also that the world becomes a lot smaller. And I don't know, like, we don't do anything special. We just have to try to remember ourselves separately from the struggles of the everyday. I mean, I'm not sure
Leila,
how
what has this glioblastoma journey taught you?
Oh my goodness, so much. Like, I think that the thing that it's most taught me is how fluid we are as human beings. Like, that you can change, so many things can change. Your brain, your body, your life circumstances, and yet the essence of the human being is sort of irrepressible. You know, the soul. Also, the biggest thing is that, it's a cliche, but love. You know, when you love somebody, you can actually survive anything, I believe. And I mean, we've survived an unimaginable, as I'm sure you know, because you know what glioblastoma is like.
I'm Megs now.
No.
So I want to know, how have you been doing this week since I saw you last?
I think we've been doing pretty well, haven't we? Megs, I think we've been doing well, Megs.
And Rod, how do you feel about that? Do you agree? Well, we've had some difficult moments in the last week, especially yesterday, I think, when things were so hard getting up and getting. Yesterday, I discovered once again that I've become totally unable to walk. And so I had to sort of half crawl out to the car that was going to take us to Providence, Rhode Island. And that was very disturbing for both of us.
Well, when something happens very suddenly, you know, because of the neurological, as they call them, events, they always just suddenly happen. So it's hard for me. I get, obviously internally, I'm like in a huge distress and panic when I suddenly saw that. And then that often manifests as, so I get really anxious about it. And then he feels anxiety, and then all the communication breaks down. Because, anyway, so coming back to the point, I think, the learning, and Meg's, the therapist, said this to us. She said she's seen couples who've got so far fewer challenges, who have been unable to keep their relationships together or do well how we've done. I don't know. How have we done that? I think we're both irrepressible people, very, very determined people. We always have been in our lives before this happened. And I think both of us just took this as another thing that we were, okay, this has happened to us. Like, we're going to be equally focused and determined and, you know, in this. And I think if one of us had been less so, it wouldn't have worked. Our strong characters, which have led to us to have a lot of conflict, have also allowed us to unite in the strength, I think. And that's how we've done that.
Are you, I'm Banks now. Are you still Fredney?
Fredney, did he explain about that?
No.
Fredney is our couple's name.
Yeah.
It's an amalgam of my first name, Rodney, which I almost never use. Only teachers, policemen, and doctors use it. And
my nickname's Freddie.
So, and her nickname is
So
Freddie.
it's like Brangelina.
Why is your nickname Freddie?
Well, it's interesting because my parents, when they got married on their honeymoon, they went on a boat in Paris on the river, and the boatman was called Freddie, and for some reason they began calling each other Freddie as a result, probably because they liked him. And then when I was born, they started to call me Little Freddie.
Okay.
And that became my nickname, Freddie.
And then we had a housekeeper whose name was Leila. So when she was here and Leila was here, we had to find a way to differentiate. And so I started calling
me Freddie.
Freddie. Myself.
So now you're Fredney.
And I suddenly one day I said, we need it. I don't even know. I just suddenly said Fredney, and it stuck. And Meg's our therapist. She often, as you do when you're in couples therapy, you have arguments because you kind of have a moderator, so it feels safe to have a fight. Because like mummy's there, she's going to make sure nothing too awful happens.
Our first session with Meg, we had a fight.
Yeah. And then one of those times, I think Meg said to Rod, she said, what do you want now, Rod? What do you want right now? And he turned to me and he said, I just want Fredney. I just want to be Fredney again. And it sort of became our safe word, Fredney. Like, so now whenever things are really, like sometimes when you get really difficult, we'll both look at each other and we'll just go, Fredney. And the other one will go, Fredney. And
Okay, I'm Mexican. So have you had to use Fredney as your safe word recently? And tell me about when and why.
He's hilarious.
Oh,
he's the interviewer.
I know. Look at
it. Great. Go off. Do your thing, Rodney.
So he dedicated his book to Fredney. The book has a dedication in the front. Oh. And we think it's hilarious because in the audio version, the narrator, he goes, to Fredney. And I just keep replaying it like on a loop because we think it's hilarious. Hilarious.
Yeah. And then when I turned the manuscript in, my editor came to me. He took me out to lunch to celebrate and brought Leila along too. And at lunch he said, I have one concern. Yeah. The copy desk wants to know, how do you spell Fredney? They can't find any published reference to it. You know, copy editors, either they want to find it in a dictionary or in some credible published example somewhere. But you Google Fredney and you're not going to find it anywhere.
Leila, what's your...
I said, well, I explained how it came about. And I said, well, since it's a neologism and I'm the author of the neologism, I think I have the right to mandate how it's spelled. And it's spelled Fredney. Fredney.
Leila, what's your favorite thing about Rod?
Careful.
I love his, I mean, there are many, many things, but probably he makes me laugh. He's hilarious. He's irreverent. He really isn't afraid of anybody or anything at all.
That's because I learned long ago that the way into a woman's knickers was by making her laugh.
Well, it's true though, but you need more than just that.
Yeah, there has to be something else there.
You see what I mean? He's brilliant. He's very creative, and I think that is the creativity is like brings it back down to what I'm saying about the brain. Okay, so if some parts have changed, he has creatively recreated himself. That's amazing. It's just stunning. I'm so impressed, honestly. I mean, I'm not denying the difficulty. You know how hard this is. I'm sure you do. But on the other hand, how much I've changed as a human being through this process is I would never give it back. You know, the difference in me as a human and how I've come to learn about the world and, you know, challenge myself in all these ways. And I honestly say I feel really proud. You know, I do. I feel proud that I have been able to, what's the way of saying it, to be in this experience and stay. Sometimes, I mean, there have been lots of moments where I felt really like a bit of a failure and I'm not good enough and I'm ashamed of myself, and I hate feeling that. But then on the other hand, you will never, ever become all you can be if you don't have to go through those challenges. Mm-hmm. So I've often actually said, which sounds crazy, but it's true. I am grateful and I'm glad for this opportunity. It's as much as there's so much anguish. I think the biggest one.
Well, Rod said the same thing. He said he was grateful that he went through this. Mm-hmm.
I just want to speak as the person who doesn't have glioblastoma. Is maybe other people will identify with this as always watching the person you love and being so afraid of that they're leaving, and you just have to control that feeling and to stay present.
That brings me back to another of our talking points, Amber. If I could regress.
Please. The floor is yours.
And that was that I think there really needs to be better information available to glioblastoma patients on life expectancy. I've had the same doctor give me 3 different estimates for my life expectancy, 13, 14, and 15 months. And
you've surpassed all of that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but I think it would have been helpful if I knew earlier a couple of things. One is a little better estimate, and the fact that when you're given a life expectancy estimate, it's usually the mean life expectancy from the day of diagnosis. Mm-hmm. And the mean is not the average. And a lot of people confuse that. Even doctors, I think, confuse it. The mean is, if you remember your high school math, the mean is defined as the point on a line with 100 points. The point at which there's 50 points to the right, longer, and 50 points to the left,
so it's the
shorter.
middle one.
So it's the mean is the midpoint among 100 people.
So that means that 50 would live for longer, but 50 would live shorter.
Right.
But it doesn't really, life expectancy doesn't mean anything in this disease. I mean, the doctors have mostly encouraged us not to think about that, honestly. But having said that, Eric's longest surviving patient has lived for 22 years.
Yeah, and my other oncologist, Howard Fine, is a very prominent scientist as well, as is Eric Wong. As he says, he's had scores of patients who have survived decades.
Yeah. But one of the things we had to learn to live with was not ever being able to predict. That's incredibly difficult. As you know, every 2 months you have a scan, and you have to be prepared that this is it, it's over, because it's so fast moving. It's terrible, like the psychological pressure of that, unbearable.
Well, it means, we can't plan basic little things like where we're going to live in our later years, because we don't know if there'll be any later years.
But we've learned to basically assume that he's going to stay alive. We just work on that assumption, and that's it. Yeah. You have to. Yeah. That's what Dr. Bookvar told.
Yeah, it's a healthy assumption, actually.
Susie and Sam, who we as you know, we're friends with them, and that's what he told them. That I think they said, "Oh, how do we live? How do we made all these plans?" He said, "You just make the plans, just live. That's what you have to do." I think that's what everyone has to do in the world, but they just don't realize that next week they might die. They don't know that.
Anyone, no matter what your situation is, literally anyone.
Yeah, life is fatal. Life is a fatal disease.
So it gives you incredible power when you go through something like this. Like I think we both feel like superpower of having learned and understood these things. It makes you not afraid of things. I feel like I'm not really afraid of anything. I mean, I shouldn't tempt fate, but it's changed my level of fear in general.
Well, Rod and Leila, it has been such an honor to have both of you on the Glioblastoma AKA GBM podcast and share your story and your love. And I'm so honored to sit down with you guys. And thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Glioblastoma AKA GBM. To learn more about the Glioblastoma Research Organization, you can visit us online at gbmresearch.org, on Instagram or Facebook at Glioblastoma Research, on Twitter at glioblastoma.org, or on LinkedIn as Glioblastoma Research Organization. To start your own fundraiser, to donate, or to learn how to get more involved with the organization, please email us at contact@gbmresearch.org, and we'll see you on the next episode of Glioblastoma AKA GBM.